And it's just like me and him. As soon as I walked in, he said, "Hey, come here." And he's blind. He's taller than you. He's just huge and skinny. Not built like a normal African.
Okay, yeah.
And like we know each other forever.
Oh, okay.
So he says,
They weren't just the faces of an era. They were brothers in boots, bound by riffs, harmonies, and the kind of friendship that made stadium lights feel personal. Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi didn't merely co-write hits. They co-authored a mythology, one that bled through every solo and chorus of the band's golden years. But behind the pyrotechnics and platinum records lay a deeper story, one of loyalty, burnout, unspoken tension, and a parting that left fans aching for resolution. Now, at 65, Richie Sambora has finally exposed Jon Bon Jovi. Let's start from the very beginning. Jersey origins and musical kinship. Jon Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora both emerged from the resilient blue-collar roots of New Jersey, a state with a long-standing rock and roll pedigree. Jon Bon Jovi, born on Francis Bon Jovi Jr. on March 2, 1962, in Perth Amboy, was raised in Sayreville, a working-class town steeped in the ethos of perseverance and local pride. His early years were spent balancing school, part-time work, including sweeping floors at his cousin Tony Bon Jovi's power station studios in Manhattan, and local gigs that laid the groundwork for his future in music. Sambora, born Richard Stephen Sambora, on July 11, 1959 in Perth Amboy as well, was raised in the nearby town of Woodbridge. Like John, Richie was raised in a Polish-Italian Catholic family and inherited a strong sense of discipline and humility. Both men began their musical pursuits in the New Jersey club circuit, cutting their teeth in small-time bands that performed at local venues such as the Fast Lane in Asbury Park and the Fountain Casino in Aberdeen. But their destinies were intertwined. John started with Atlantic City Expressway, a cover band, while Richie played with a variety of acts, including Message, Mercy, and the hard rock band Duke Williams and the Extremes. Sambora had also auditioned for and nearly joined Kiss in the early 1980s, but turned down the opportunity because he felt it wasn't the right fit for his style and aspirations. Their shared admiration for artists like Bruce Springsteen, Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, and Eric Clapton was a binding force. Springsteen's lyrical authenticity and anthemic sound had a particularly profound influence on John, while Sambora leaned into the guitar-driven, blues-tinged legacies of Jimmy Page and Clapton. This convergence of tastes laid the foundation for a dynamic that would later define Bon Jovi's sound. The pivotal moment came in 1983 when Sambora officially joined Bon Jovi just before the band secured a deal with Mercury Records. His joining marked a crucial turning point. At the time, the original lineup also included keyboardist David Bryan, bassist Alec John Such, and drummer Tico Torres. Richie's arrival added vocal harmonies, songwriting depth, and a collaborative energy that helped shape the band's sonic identity. Early performances, especially at the Fast Lane in Asbury Park and the Sayreville clubs that dotted the Central Jersey scene, showcased the magnetic synergy between John's impassioned vocals and Richie's textured guitar work. By the time they recorded their sophomore album, 7800 Degrees Fahrenheit, in 1985, and especially with the release of Slippery When Wet in 1986, the John-Richie pairing had crystallized into one of rock's most compelling frontman-guitarist duos. Tracks like Livin' on a Prayer, co-written by Sambora, John, and Desmond Child, featured Richie's talk box intro, now iconic, as well as his backing vocals. Wanted Dead or Alive, another co-write, highlighted Richie's acoustic sensibilities and storytelling guitar style, further anchoring the band's departure from glam tropes toward heartland rock credibility. Off-stage, the bond between Jon and Richie was more than professional. They were often seen together in interviews, on tour buses, and during writing sessions, reinforcing a public image of brotherhood. Fans and critics alike picked up on their camaraderie. It was a partnership that felt genuine and symbiotic. Richie was often regarded as Jon's emotional anchor, the one who could check his ego, offer comic relief, and support him through the pressures of sudden superstardom. In interviews from the late 1980s and early 90s, Jon often credited Richie with keeping him sane, while Richie described Jon as a brother in arms. Their closeness was not simply media packaging. It translated directly into the creative process. Bon Jovi's biggest hits during their late 80s peak, Slippery When Wet in 1986, New Jersey in 1988, and Keep the Faith in 1992, carried the fingerprints of a partnership that worked because of mutual respect, complementary skill sets, and a shared vision rooted in their Jersey upbringing. Their rise to fame was not an overnight miracle, but a culmination of years spent hustling in clubs, refining their sound, and believing in the power of songs that could resonate with the masses while staying true to their roots. But then, things changed. Uneven spotlight, emergence of a silent hierarchy. As Bon Jovi's popularity surged through the 1980s and 1990s, a subtle but consequential imbalance developed within the band's internal dynamics, one that increasingly positioned Jon Bon Jovi as the singular face of the group, while Richie Sambora's profound contributions, both musically and emotionally, were often left in the shadows. Despite being a co-writer on nearly all of Bon Jovi's major hits, among them Livin' on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive, I'll Be There for You, and Keep the Faith, Sambora was rarely given equal footing in the spotlight. In fact, from Slippery When Wet onward, marketing and public appearances increasingly centered on Jon Bon Jovi. Press photos, interviews, music videos, and album artwork prominently featured Jon as the band's defining image. While this may have been commercially strategic, after all, his looks and charisma were undeniably marketable. It quietly chipped away at the perception of the band as a collaborative unit. Yet Sambora's artistic role was far from secondary. His guitar work, vocal harmonies, and songwriting sensibility formed the emotional and melodic backbone of Bon Jovi's biggest records. Drawing heavily from blues and soul traditions, Sambora brought a sense of depth and restraint that stood in contrast to the glam rock theatrics of the era. His solos often prioritized melody over speed, and his tone carried a warmth that lent gravitas to ballads like Never Say Goodbye and I'll Be There for You. On the latter, his vocal harmonies and guitar phrasing transformed a power ballad into something raw and aching. Critics and fellow musicians alike have long identified Sambora as the emotional core of the band, even if that recognition was rarely institutionalized in awards or media narratives. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, tensions became more pronounced. Jon Bon Jovi had not only become the band's face, but had also taken increasing control over creative and managerial decisions. This shift coincided with Jon's ventures into solo work and acting, and his desire to rebrand the band into a more mature, adult contemporary outfit. Sambora, though still a co-writer and performer, found himself in a quieter corner of the room. Interviews and retrospective accounts, including Sambora's own reflections in 2024 with Yahoo Entertainment and the New York Post, reveal a growing feeling of being sidelined, physically present, creatively vital, but emotionally invisible. This divide was not only professional, but deeply personal. Sambora, during this time, struggled with addiction and was navigating a painful divorce from actress Heather Locklear. He often cited exhaustion, not just from touring, but from feeling unheard within a group he helped build. As John made more executive decisions unilaterally, Sambora's attempts to voice his concerns were increasingly met with indifference, reinforcing a silent but immovable hierarchy within the band. The breaking point came in April 2013 during Bon Jovi's Because We Can tour. Family over fame, choosing fatherhood. By 2013, Richie Sambora had spent 3 decades in the spotlight, writing, touring, and performing as one half of the creative engine that powered Bon Jovi. But in April of that year, without warning or ceremony, he disappeared from the stage. The announcement from the band was vague. Sambora would not be performing due to personal issues. No specifics, no timeline, no farewell. The reasons behind that exit would remain shrouded for years, but by 2024, Sambora had finally begun to speak with clarity and finality about what led him to walk away from a global juggernaut at the peak of its power. In multiple interviews that year, including one with People and another with Yahoo Entertainment, Sambora explained that the choice was not just about fatigue or internal tensions, though both were present. It was, most of all, about fatherhood. His daughter Ava, born in 1997 to Sambora and then-wife Heather Locklear, had entered her teenage years by the time Bon Jovi launched the Because We Can World Tour in 2013. Sambora had already weathered a high-profile divorce, a stint in rehab, and the crushing demands of a non-stop touring cycle. As Ava began to face her own challenges, he recognized that his presence, not his paychecks or platinum records, was what mattered most. The pressure within Bon Jovi had also been mounting. Creative control had gradually shifted toward Jon Bon Jovi, whose grip over the band's direction left Sambora feeling increasingly sidelined. His role as co-writer and emotional equal had been reduced to that of a hired gun. There wasn't a lot of room left for partnership, he admitted. The weight of emotional exhaustion, compounded by the demands of international touring, became unsustainable. But rather than stage a public confrontation or negotiate a more humane arrangement, Sambora made the only decision that felt true. He walked away. His daughter, then 16, was going through a difficult period, and he didn't want to be the absentee rock star parent. The decision was both immediate and final. He did not return for the remaining shows. He was not consulted when the band brought in replacement guitarist Phil X, and he was never given a proper send-off. Sambora's comments in 2024 did not romanticize his departure. "Of course, I miss it sometimes," he admitted. "I miss the music, the fans, the rush of it. But I don't regret leaving. My daughter needed me more than the band did." It was a decision that ran counter to the mythology of rock stardom, where ego and ambition often eclipse personal well-being. Yet Sambora saw clearly what many performers only understand too late. Legacy is not just what you build on stage, but what you build at home. The result of his absence was not just musical. Bon Jovi's sound shifted audibly. Songs like These Days and Dry County, which bore his signature blend of bluesy melancholy and emotional scale, gave way to more straightforward, anthemic rock. Fans felt the difference. The layered harmonies were thinner, the solos more functional. The banter between songs, once full of camaraderie, now felt more scripted. And though Jon Bon Jovi remained the voice and face of the band, many longtime fans quietly acknowledged that a crucial emotional dimension had been lost. Sambora, for his part, has not stopped making music. He's released solo work, contributed to collaborations, and hinted at new material. But his priorities remain clear. "Music is still a huge part of my life," he said in 2024. "But Ava, she's my greatest hit." The fractured bond with Jon Bon Jovi. Interestingly, Even at their worst, neither Sambora nor Jon Bon Jovi engaged in public mudslinging. In fact, Jon has rarely spoken in depth about Sambora's departure. In interviews following the 2013 tour shakeup, he acknowledged the challenges of Sambora's absence, but often shifted the focus toward moving forward. By 2016, guitarist Phil X had been made a permanent member, and the band released This House Is Not For Sale in 2016, their first studio album without Sambora. Jon kept messaging positive and forward-looking, sidestepping deeper questions about the internal breakdown. This studied silence may have been strategic. Both men seemed intent on preserving the legacy they had built together, unwilling to drag their history into tabloid spectacle. But for longtime fans, the lack of closure has remained unsettling. The absence of any public reconciliation or even mutual acknowledgement created an emotional vacuum. Many were left wondering how two men, who had once appeared inseparable on stage and in interviews, could part ways so quietly. Sambora's more recent reflections, particularly in 2024 interviews, have begun to illuminate the personal cost of that silence. He spoke of missing the camaraderie, but standing by his decision to prioritize his well-being and family. He expressed disappointment that the bond they once shared had faded not in an argument, but in a series of silent exclusions and unspoken decisions. "It wasn't one fight," he said. "It was a slow fade. That's harder in some ways. There's no moment where you say, 'This is over.' It just slips away." That slow fade, marked by growing creative control, emotional detachment, and the burden of a brand Jon Bon Jovi had come to bear alone, defined the end of an era. In the end, it wasn't a breakup in the traditional rock and roll sense. It was a quiet dismantling, hidden behind stadium lights and press statements, known in full only to the two men who once called themselves brothers. Speaking with people in January 2024, Sambora delivered what many fans had long hoped for but never expected: an emotional and candid apology. For the first time, he publicly admitted that he had ghosted the band, walking away without the conversations or closure that his bandmates, particularly Jon Bon Jovi, may have deserved. "I should have handled it better," he said. "I just walked. I didn't call. I didn't explain. That's on me." He clarified that the decision had been a long time coming. It was not triggered by a single argument or isolated event, but rather by the accumulation of years of feeling creatively stifled, emotionally isolated, and overworked within a system that no longer felt collaborative. He emphasized that his exit was never about ego or conflict. It was about mental health, personal boundaries, and most importantly, being there for his then 15-year-old daughter, Ava. Jon Bon Jovi, for his part, did not respond publicly to the apology. His stance throughout 2023 and 2024 interviews remained measured and dignified. While acknowledging that Sambora's absence had left a creative void, he made it clear that the band had evolved. "We had our run," Jon said in a Variety interview in April 2024. He expressed no bitterness, but neither did he express interest in reopening the chapter. "I'm not interested in being a tribute act to myself," he remarked during a 2023 press conference. Jon's focus now rests on the present, a period shaped by both physical and emotional transitions, including a serious vocal cord injury that sidelined him from live performances for much of 2022 and 2023. Bon Jovi's 2024 album Forever reflects this new reality. The themes running through the record, loss, aging, and acceptance, mirror his current worldview. The songs carry less bombast and more introspection, signaling a turn away from the stadium anthems of the 80s toward a more grounded, contemplative voice. Sambora, too, has drifted into blues and soul, favoring expressive guitar work and intimate songwriting over the arena rock formulas of old. A reunion, while longed for by fans, now feels artistically incongruous. Sambora's style no longer fits Bon Jovi's polished mainstream approach, and Jon's vocal limitations and revised stage identity would make a return to their former dynamic not only difficult, but potentially disheartening. Both men have evolved, albeit separately. The emotional and artistic distances, compounded by a decade of independent paths, suggest that a reunion would require rebuilding trust and renegotiating boundaries that neither seems inclined to revisit. While Sambora's apology adds a layer of grace to his departure, and may have healed some of the public wounds, it doesn't override the reality that they are no longer the men they were when they wrote, "I'll be there for you." Sometimes closure doesn't come with a comeback tour, but with a well-timed truth. And in that sense, 2024 may have delivered the most honest encore yet. Richie Sambora's life after Bon Jovi. Since stepping away from Bon Jovi in 2013, Richie Sambora has quietly reshaped his identity. Creatively, Sambora never stopped making music, but he shed the spectacle. In 2018, he released Radio Free America with then-partner Orianthi under the name RSO. The album, a mix of blues, country rock, and soul, marked a departure from Bon Jovi's high-gloss production. Earlier, his solo efforts, such as Stranger in This Town and Undiscovered Soul, had already revealed a more introspective songwriter, steeped in blues and gospel traditions. After 2013, he embraced smaller stages, occasional benefit concerts, and private songwriting sessions rather than industry events or world tours. In 2019, he performed at the MusiCares Person of the Year event honoring Dolly Parton, and he's contributed to charity efforts for veterans and addiction recovery, causes close to his heart. Richie acknowledges that there are regrets, particularly in how his exit from the band was handled, but he doesn't regret the choice itself. "I'm proud of what we built," he told Classic Rock magazine in 2022. "Those songs, those are part of people's lives now. That matters." While his presence is no longer on the Bon Jovi stage, it echoes in the DNA of the band's most iconic work. The talkbox hook of "Livin' on a Prayer," the aching harmonies of "Never Say Goodbye," and the steel-laced grit of "Wanted Dead or Alive." Fans, critics, and even fellow musicians continue to describe him as the soul of the band's most emotionally resonant era. Sambora's life now aligns with a broader movement among legacy artists, musicians who now prioritize depth, mentorship, and authenticity over spectacle. Like Dave Grohl or Bonnie Raitt, he's embraced the power of restraint and reflection. Eric Clapton, whom Sambora has long admired, once said, "It's not the notes you play, it's the ones you don't." Sambora seems to live by this ethos now. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.